Hey folks, welcome to week 3 of 5 to the Cool Season Flower Chronicles. My name is Lisa Mason Ziegler and I am the author of the book Cool Flowers. That's what this whole 5-week series is based upon, right? So I just wanted you to know that this series is being brought to you by thegardenersworkshop.com, and our goal is to make it possible for flower lovers at all levels to be able to grow and enjoy flowers, and even for folks to build businesses based on flowers, right? So if you haven't already gotten the book Cool Flowers, this is what it looks like. All the links that I'm going to be mentioning will all be below this video, so you can grab those there. But I would love to autograph a book for you. And I also have a free video book study that's a companion to the book. And when you buy the book from us, you'll automatically receive an email with the link to those videos. This week, we're going to really be digging down deep into how everybody can plant cool flowers. A lot of people think they have site issues or some little tweaks that keep them from planting cool flowers, and I've gotten a lot of questions, and I think most of the questions that I saw will actually, I believe, be answered by tonight's talk, okay? So the first thing I want us to talk about is, or I want to say, we've already spoken about figuring out what the concept of cool flowers. Then the second week we talked about figuring out when you plant cool flowers, right? So this week we're going to address some of the site issues that can really cause problems, or you can really make it so much easier and better for your plants by some steps that we're going to follow. Next week, we're going to talk about whether you direct seed or transplant. So I'm not going to be talking in depth about the difference and which ones are which. However, we do prepare a little differently for direct seeding and fall transplants, and we're going to get into that. The first thing I want to point out is that whether you are fall planting or very early spring planting, you've got to prepare your planting areas in the fall. And the reason for that is, typically for most of us, what does it do all winter? It either rains, snows, or ices, plus it's cold, which means the ground does not dry out. So working soil in winter for many of us is next to impossible. It is for me. I mean, the soil, once we get that first, if we get a snow in December, I know that there's going to be no garden dirt work until spring pretty much comes, because it just never gets dry enough, because you never want to work wet soil. You destroy your soil structure, and you can never really fix that. I mean, I'm serious about that. So whether you're going to be fall planting or very early spring planting, fall planting is typically 6 to 8 weeks before your first fall frost, and very early spring planting is 6 to 8 weeks before your last spring frost. So that is really a tough time. That 6 to 8 weeks before the last spring frost, that's when almost everybody says to me, oh my gosh, there's no way I can plant then. We can't get out in our garden and work. That's why you're going to do all the work in fall, y'all. Not only is that a great time of the year to actually do the prep work, but it is such a gift when it comes time to plant. All the hard work's behind you. So we're going to talk about that. So there are two different ways that we plant cool flowers. One is direct seeding, and one is by transplants. And that is not a personal choice. That is the way that that particular seeds prefer to be planted. And in fact, and there will be in the links below, we now have the seeds on our online store in categories. So we have categorized, if you go to Cool Flowers, you go to our store and you go to the seeds, there is a cool season seed category. And in that category, you can look at all the seeds together if you want, but there's two other categories. One are those seeds that I direct seed, and then there's the seeds that I always transplant. So you can very easily see which way I go. So I want to talk first about preparing for those direct seeded beds. And I understand all the confusion, y'all, because there's so many different ways to do things. And if you're not experienced enough in farming, I spent a lot of years kind of finding what my little sweet spot for preparing for Cool Flowers. And that's what I'm sharing with you. This does not mean that it's the way that you have to do it. I'm just giving you my experience. So let's talk about the direct seeding first. We direct seed into open beds. That means there's no film, there's no landscape cloth. It is much more labor intensive to manage using film and making holes or landscape cloth. Film and landscape cloth are the same. They're the same concept. You're just using two different products. When you have holes in fabric or film and you poke holes and then you sow seeds into each holes, well, first off, winter weeds grow even as bad, if not worse, than summer weeds do. So that means you're going to have to whole weed all winter long for most of us. That would be for us. When we sow those seeds into an open soil bed, and we do it in a deliberate way, which I talk about in Cool Flowers, and I talk about it in all my blogs, to be deliberate about your pattern, straight lines, how you space your rows apart, which make hoeing a breeze, y'all. I can hoe a 120-foot bed with 4 rows in it in less than 12 minutes. And it's not because I'm a superstar. It's just because I have the right hoe and the right technique. I'm pretty sure the hoe link is below this video. And on that link is a video of me hoeing a garden. So when your soil is open and you sow in straight lines, it is so easy to once a week during the fall season until winter really sets in, just to run the hoe all over that bed to eliminate all developing weed seeds or seeds that are developing into weeds. It is so easy, y'all. And so we direct seed everything that we're gonna direct seed in the fall. But if you are in a region or if you want to direct seed something in very early spring, I will warn you for one thing. If your very early spring is 6 to 8 weeks before your last frost date, typically that means it is still really cold. For us, we typically have snow on our beds sometimes. It still, can be really, really cold, dropping way below freezing. And direct seeding at that time is not going to really sprout any plants. You can sow your seeds, but they're just going to sit there. And that defeats the whole purpose of Cool Flowers, of getting your plants in and developed and have them ready to roll when the season starts. So I warn people about, there are people that do it and do it successfully. But I'm just saying that we typically don't do that. We prepare our beds, however you prepare, and we sow our seeds into open beds, hoe them until winter sets in, and then we have pretty much exhausted the seed supply that's on the surface of that bed. But if you did want to save the bed for your very early spring, what we would then do is just put a silage tarp over that prepared bed to be able to be pulled back when the time would come. So that's how we fall prepare that. The other type of bed that you need to prepare is for transplants. You can do all the transplants you want in very early spring. The drawback is most people can't get their bed prepared. So we prepare our beds in the fall and we cover them. We do use the Bio 360, which is the biodegradable film. You can use anything your choice. We use the biodegradable film for that very reason. It's not plastic and it can be turned into the soil. And the black side up tends to really help the cool flower transplants grow even a little more all winter because that black absorbs some of the sunlight. So we make our beds, we cover them with film. There's a link to that below, and there's also a video on that product showing how we laid that by hand for years. So we make our beds, we cover it in film, and we plant our transplants. So if you want to also do very early spring transplanting, you do the very same thing. You prepare the bed just like you were going to plant it. And so we can do one of two things. It really depends on the kind of year we're having, so I'll tell you both ways. So some years, if we don't have high deer pressure, every few years we seem to like never see deer. When that happens, when we prepare our beds in the fall and we cover them with the Bio 360, we just basically leave them wide open all winter long, no covering, nothing, not planted. They're empty beds because that's what we're going to plant in mid-February. However, if you have varmint troubles or if you have a dog that runs around your garden that doesn't respect garden beds, I would hoop and cover those beds. That just keeps creatures from walking on the film and putting holes in it. And then when February or whenever your very early spring is, you just take the row cover down, plant your plants, and you can put it back up if you want to. And I know I'll get the question, doesn't the Bio 360 break down? We have not experienced that, and we have warm and cold winters. I mean, we can be 70 degrees today, 21 tomorrow, with snow, sleet, ice, and we always use Bio 360. We apply it in the fall, and cool flowers, well, they're still out there, keep going sometimes till mid-July and August, and the film still has not broken down, so that has not been a problem with us. So if you're going to make those beds, you just have to provide a way to keep them from growing weeds over the winter. Winter weeds are very vicious. We also have heard of people that prepare all their beds and then lay silage tarps over them and then pull it back and then put film down, but I don't really recommend that. I just think it's a very chancy, risky to have to work soil that could be frozen at that time of the year. And if you prepare open beds, definitely silage tarp them over the winter or you really will have a lot of weeds. Chickweed is the one that we have that is such high pressure here. And I'm telling you, if you get moisture, chickweed grows, I mean, it's a mat, and in a week it will consume beds. So really be careful with that. So I hope that kind of answered the questions that I was submitted about asking how to do that. So you're basically preparing whatever type of planting bed you need, and then you have to have a way to cover it if it's an open bed, or you can put down whatever your covering is. Let's just say, for instance, you do use landscape fabric, which we do not plant in any landscape fabric here, which would have the holes already burnt in it. You would need to lay another piece of something on top of that to block the holes getting light, so weeds do not grow in those holes to hold it until you plant in very early spring. So the key is prepare in fall, then prevent weeds from growing over winter. I think many people are under the illusion that weeds don't grow in the winter, and by far that is not true. We find that they are just about pretty vicious at that time of the year. So now I want to talk about some site issues that cool flowers are particularly can fall victim to that we really don't necessarily face when we're growing in the summertime. So I guess I would say these are cool weather growing issues that people sometimes face. And the very first one, and I have this problem in certain areas on my farm, are drainage issues. You don't really learn where your really bad drainage spots are until you start overwintering plants. Nothing will kill a cool season hardy annual quicker than wet feet. Because, one of the benefits of growing cool flowers, we used to make a seed collection called the Lazy Gardener seed collection. And why did we call it that? It's because it was a fall planted, direct seeded seed collection. And it's because it rains and snows and ices, right, more in the winter. I mean, often in the winter. And because there's no heat, the soil never really dries out. So you basically really don't irrigate. I mean, we don't here because we get a fair amount of moisture. Well, that's a gift, but that can also be a curse, because if you have poor drainage, which many of us do, and you just don't even really know it yet, and you get a lot of snow or a lot of winter rain, those poor little cool season hardy annual roots will just drown. Literally. I mean, even though you don't see standing water, the water doesn't drain away and the plants fall victim to all kinds of funky diseases. So excellent drainage. Ways to fix that. Of course, cool flowers or cool season hardy annuals should always be planted in a raised bed. Even if you don't plant in raised beds in the summer, I would definitely recommend doing that for cool season, for overwintering in very early spring. And the taller you can get, I would love to have like 15-inch tall raised beds. It's not very feasible in a farming situation to be able to do that. But the taller, the better. I can make my own rain with irrigation, but when you get rain, or snow and snow, and there's just constant moisture, you need to ensure that the water can get away from your plant. So our beds are only raised, I would guess, about 4 inches, and that really does the great job. So if you are a no-till gardener, just make those beds. You want to plant your cool flowers in the tallest beds you have in that no-till. And this is really more encouragement to just add more organic matter to make the beds even taller and taller. And if you want to try to break up, and so usually the drainage problem is there's a subsoil, which is about, depends on your garden, 6 to 12 inches below your topsoil. And that subsoil is where all the gold lies, y'all. That's where all the moisture and all the nutrients lie that your plant's roots are, in theory, supposed to go down and sink their roots into and get. Well, in most people's gardens, it's like concrete, and that's the problem. And the only way, so you're not going to fix that by tilling necessarily. You need to use something like a broad fork. If you have a tractor, a subsoiler, tilling over and over again just makes this worse. So you really need to penetrate that subsoil, and you're not necessarily mixing it up by putting some cracks in that soil. A broad fork, we love the broad fork. There is no link for this here. Cobra head, which is a little tool that a lot of people are familiar with. Noel makes a broad fork. He designed it. It's made in America. Is beautiful, and it's the longest tines, and it's the lightest for me, and we love it. That's a great one to use. A spade with a really long blade on it to jump on it and drive it down into the soil, and don't dig it out. Rock it, cracking, and then moving a couple inches and doing it over and over to allow this stuff you're adding to get in to go down. That will improve your drainage so much, y'all. And if you have a bad spot, the more you do, you can do that at every season. Every time you're taking plants out and putting them in, it's a great workout. Builds great legs. Do it as much and as often as you can in between plants. What you will experience when you improve that drainage is not only will your cool season plants winter over better, they will grow taller, they'll be more abundant. You'll just see a big jump in the health of your plants. The other problem people face is weed prevention. We already talked about how you have to keep the weeds from growing in these wintered over beds. The same thing is true if you plant transplants in film, or you can also plant transplants into open beds. You can just mulch with any product of your choice. You can prepare your beds, cover them with 2 to 4 inches of whatever mulch is your choice. Organic mulches, like shredded bark, shredded leaves, anything like that, and then plant into it. But you're still going to have, it's such encouraging conditions that the cool season weeds will grow. So you need to monitor your cool flower garden and weed. So I've already kind of told you about the direct seeding. I hoe, so I direct seed typically about the beginning of October. And about 14 days after I've planted those seeds, typically we barely, if see at all, any seedlings yet, I start running my hoe like that video on the garden hoe product shows. I run my hoe through that garden once a week. It takes me no time, y'all, because there's no weeds yet. You can't see them, but they're developing. By doing that about every 7 to 10 days until winter really sets in, you've really exhausted all the weed seed bank in the surface. You can mulch if you want. I used to back in the days when we weren't big growers. You can do it definitely. I would wait to mulch until you have hoed 3 or 4 times to extinguish those weed seeds on the surface. And you literally will have no weeds in the spring. I mean, it is so few and far between, it's a gift. The Bio 360 film that we use, because our winter weed pressure is so strong, that's why we typically plant our cool flowers into the Bio 360 with the black side up so that it benefits all winter from the roots. The soil's a little warmer under there, and then because we row cover, which I'll talk about in a minute, it just is like a dreamy place underneath there. However, we will still get some weeds that'll sprout in the holes where the plants are. Making your holes as small as you physically can, just big enough to get your plant in so that your plant has room to grow out, not make it big, because that just leaves a lot of space for weeds to sprout. So that's why we really like using Bio 360 with cool flowers over winter, because our winter weed pressure is really, really strong. So row cover. If you're following the rule that we talked about in week 2, where you're only growing what is winter hardy in your winter hardiness zone, then you don't need row cover for cold protection, but there is so much more benefit beyond cold. The lightweight row cover that we use only gives 4 degrees of coverage, but it does so much more, y'all. You just can't imagine. We use hoops, we have wire hoops and lightweight row cover, and we put weights on them. There is also a link to this below, and there is a great video on the product showing my farm. We live about 2,000 feet from the river, and the rolling wind through here all winter is pretty vicious. And when you see that video, just think in your mind, if those plants weren't covered, how tattered and how wind whipped they would be. They just would not be it'd be like going outside without a windbreaker, right? I mean, it's not that you're freezing to death, but you surely are not comfortable, right? That's exactly what lightweight row cover does for hardy annuals over winter. When you put hoops and row covers on top of that black biodegradable film, it is like it's like a winter wonderland underneath there. It gets really warm during the day, so your plants grow a little more, your roots grow a little bit more, and you protect them from the wind. And the second thing we're protecting from are deer. We do have deer pressure here, even though I'm in the middle of the city, but we have lots of woods right on the other side of this neighborhood, and we don't have really bad deer pressure, but you only need like 3 deer, right, to cause major damage. So we have 5, actually, that kind of hang out around here. And they're desperate in the winter, so they're looking for stuff that they might not otherwise mess with. But even if they don't eat my plants, they walk all over the film. So we hoop and row cover. And when you use the weight bags with the 15 pounds of recommended soil in it, you can just put garden soil in the bags. 15 pounds is the magic number. We can take some pretty serious gale winds and our row covers stay down. You will see extraordinary differences when you improve your drainage, keep the weeds out, and if you use black film and then put hoops and row cover on top, it's almost as good as having a hoop house, maybe even a little better, because it cost about a 1/100th of that. And it's just so very, very versatile. We always take our row covers down when snow or ice are on the way. These are not tunnels that can withstand snow load, right? So I hope that that really helps you to kind of get a better idea of maybe some of the problems that you might be having. I think drainage is a biggie for a lot of people, and because in the summer and we have heat, it dries out the soil so fast, it masks a lot of drainage issues. So if if you have disease problems, or here's another classic, if your plants are wilted but they're not dry, that is, they're probably sitting in a bowl, but you don't realize they're sitting in a bowl because it's your subsoil. So this week, I want to share why I love poppies so much, y'all. So poppies are probably one of the, behind Bells of Ireland, I think it's the most beloved flower. When people see them and they're just like, oh gosh, I've tried to grow them. Well, first off, we direct seed poppies, Iceland poppies and the giant poppy seed. Giant poppy pod poppies. We direct seed them in the garden. We do it very successfully. Again, I can't tell you, cool flowers on the 30 flowers that are listed in this book. There is like a feature page in here, y'all. And I tell you right here, for each flower, whether you cover it with soil, should you start it inside or should you start it outside. If it shows both ways in the book that you could plant it out in the garden or start it indoors, I always list my way, the way that I do it first. And I can't tell you how many emails we get about people struggling with poppies that are trying to start them indoors. And it is very difficult. It's all about temperatures, y'all. And it is very difficult to give the cooling temperatures that poppies need to germinate. It can be done, but it is not easy. I find that direct sowing in the fall, and I believe they are winter hardy up to zone 6. So anybody from zone 6, 7, 8, and 9 would fall plant them. You do not cover the seed with soil. And I oversow like crazy. That means that I just really put a lot more down. And all of my seed sowing tips are in the book. But here's why I love these two particular poppies. The Iceland poppies, Champagne Bubbles, which are the gorgeous colored, oh, I don't have one of our new little brochures. They're on the front, shoot. The Iceland poppies are the mix that has the most gorgeous colors. They are one of the very first flowers to bloom on my farm, and to my knowledge, they are the only poppy that does not need special handling to be used as a cut flower. Meaning you can cut them. We do not stick them in boiling water. We don't scald the ends. We don't do any of that. We cut them at the proper stage, which is when their shell is still on them and they're cracked and you can just see what color they're going to be. That's when we cut them and bring them in. They just go in our regular flower conditioning process. And we get 5 to 7 days out of them. And I will tell you, it's like sweet peas. It's the best 5 to 7 days of your life for flowers. It is just the best. People absolutely adore them. And they can be easy to grow. You have to plant them at the right time, direct sow them, oversow. I mean, really oversow them. And I don't thin them either. And the other poppy that we grow that we absolutely love, which is a much stronger germinator, I will tell you that the giant poppy pods, they get a really cool, they're giant, first off. They're like 6 feet tall in the garden. They get a pod that barely fits in my hand. And the flower is very beautiful, but it only lasts about 1 to 2 days in the garden. Do not make the mistake and cut it at that stage. It's that enormous, gorgeous green pod that we grow them for. They are coveted by flower arrangers, by florists. I like, if you're going to use them in your mixed bouquets, if you're a flower farmer, I like to cut them when they're not any bigger than much bigger than this, because unless you're doing a really big arrangement, because when they get giant, because what happens is the petals will fall off, the pod's in the middle. The pod will continue to get bigger and bigger as you leave it there. So if you're going to use it for fresh use, which is what we did, You want to cut it early to keep that gorgeous green pod from getting any blemishes on it. You can leave it in the garden longer, let it develop seeds so you can save your own. Once you buy giant poppy pod seeds, you should never have to buy them again. We sell them in the regular pack, and we have, for the first time this year, the jumbo pack. We have a limited number of jumbo packs. This is a seed that we grow and save and sell. So it is a limited amount of seed packets of those. But that's why we grow them. So, y'all, I hope that this has really helped you guys. I just thank everybody for joining me here. And this series is brought to you by thegardenersworkshop.com. And it is truly our passion to help folks of all levels that love flowers like we do to be able to grow and enjoy them, and even more so to help people build businesses based on flowers. Whether you want to be a flower farmer, a farmer florist, or if you want to be a florist that only uses locally sourced flowers, as we have some great, you can visit our course page. We have some great courses coming up. A lot of our registrations are in October and November, so please check out that page. And join me next week on Sunday evening. And next week we are talking transplant or direct seed. So I will be giving tips on doing transplants and getting those direct seeded, your best methods of doing that. So gang, till we meet again, ciao.